I definitely think like to be a content creator or an entrepreneur in any ways, I feel like you kind of have to be delusional in some
Yes. God.
capacity.
Like that was kind of delusional to have no background in product creating games. Like I knew no one in the industry, no connections. I was just like, this is gonna happen, and it happened within like a year and a half.
Having that faith is what a lot of us need to not just be successful, but to feel alive.
Yeah, and that also I feel like proves that like what is for you will be for you. Welcome back to Kwanzaa Unwrapped. I'm Asmara, and this show is about challenging the status quo and highlighting people who are redefining Black culture. Today's theme is purpose, but before we get into it, if you are not caught up on the series, be sure to check out the playlist. The first episode was a conversation on community building and belonging with creators Hariana Hook and X Mira Mira. Nard Villain and The Female Phenom join me for episode 2, discussing identity, individuality, and authenticity as creators in their 40s. Episode 3 was a conversation on making meaningful change for the greater good with actress Alasia Gray and community developer Akuya Daniela. Episode 4 was all things Black-owned businesses, and that leads me to where we are today. I am speaking with Kiara Imani and Knimbley on what it means to pivot, design your career, and walk in purpose. But before we get into the conversation, allow me to tell you a little bit more about today's guests. Kiara Imani is an attorney, author, a mom, and the co-founder of the LikeU conversation cards, a tabletop game meant to facilitate authentic human connection. Her entrepreneurial journey took off after making a major career in life pivot in 2019 when she took a hiatus from working full-time as a lawyer. Kiara has since become a writer, a game designer, a radio host, and in 2022, she published her debut book, Therapy Isn't Just for White People, a collection of essays exploring how her own experience in therapy helped her to unpack racial trauma that affected her mental health, self-image, and worldview. Kiara's multifaceted resume has been featured in publications like Forbes, and she continues to use her gifting to ignite meaningful conversations and bring people together. Joining us later is Knimbley, who is a gaming creator, blending her background in science and her love of art and fashion to build a comforting, educational, and enriching space for her community. The now Twitch partner began to build her audience in 2020, streaming fantasy RPGs and sharing low-sensory ASMR content like video game lore keeping, which has allowed her to connect with an underrepresented demographic of gamers. Her channel has since been featured on the front page of Twitch for various campaigns over the years, including Black Brilliance, Legendary Women, and Together for Pride. Knimbley's impact as a comfort creator has even landed her as a panelist in front of companies like Microsoft, YouTube, and Forbes, sharing her insights on best practices for partnering with creators who value authenticity and community. Both of our guests today embody what it means to live outside of labels and carve a path that is unique to them. So let's go ahead and get into the conversation. So welcome to day 5 of my Kwanzaa series. So today's theme is Nia, which is the Swahili word for purpose. And I brought you here to talk a little bit about how you embody this principle, not only in your career, but your other endeavors as well. So yeah, welcome to my channel, Kiara. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I love that we're doing Nia today because that's my little sister's name, Nia, purpose.
Oh, very, very fitting. But I'm really big on starting kind of like with an origin story. So I feel like a lot of like who we were as a kid can tell us a lot about who we are now. So I'm curious, like what were you like as a kid? Like what were your hobbies? What were your interests? Did you have like a dream job growing up?
Yeah, I would say I had a lot of imagination. I was always writing and scribbling in journals, some of which I still have. My parents did a great job of keeping my journals. I was a negotiator even as a kid. I remember getting in trouble in middle school and I got my phone taken away, and my parents were trying to decide what my punishment was going to be. And then the next day, they like looked under their door, and I had like written up and typed out a business proposal for like what I would do to get my phone back. It had like an apology at the beginning, and it was like, I think I should earn it. These are the things that I can do. I can wash the car. I can help with dishes, all the things. And my parents just looked at the business proposal and they were like, all right, you've written your own punishment. So Good for you. But just that very like entrepreneurial do-it-yourself mentality. I emailed Oprah back when email was like just becoming a thing, like telling her my mom should be on the show because she had such a great story. I did all kinds of things. I tried to get myself into a magnet school. I like sent them my resume and application at like 10. And my mom was like, you can't do these things without us. Um, so yeah, I would say a lot of who I am now was there as a child.
Definitely like a go-getter. I love that you just emailed Oprah. You're like, you know what? I think I can do your show. I got a great story for you.
Exactly.
So what was your like? I feel like that's a good segue into your career. So what was your like adult life like before your current career path, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I'm an attorney. I'm still an attorney. I still practice, but how I practice looks very different. I work from home. I've kind of set the boundaries for what practicing was going to look like for me. I knew that I didn't want to go to a law firm. I knew that I wanted to have flexible hours. I'm a mom now, so that's even more important. Uh, but when I first started, practicing, I was doing what everyone else was doing driving, well, not everyone else, but a lot of people, an hour back and forth to work, sometimes more, depending on traffic, sitting in the office 8 to 10 hours a day. I had, no life really outside of work. And I think part of being in the office was great because I got good training, I got to meet people, and I definitely understand needing to pay your dues and needing to learn. But I do think just with the way that technology has advanced and the way that the world has changed, there's so many different ways where you can flexibly get all of that experience without having to do the like 9 to 5 in office grind that we all came up with. So that is no longer my life. And I've definitely just taken that idea of how can I be flexible and what are the most important things to me? How can I make sure I'm getting those done on my terms?
I learned that the way you kind of got into being in entertainment law was pretty significant. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the story of like your last year or last few years in law school and kind of how you got into entertainment law?
Yeah, so I knew in law school that I wanted to practice entertainment. Of course, people are like, there's no such thing, which there definitely is a such thing. There are lots of areas of law, but entertainment is very much a specialty. But I didn't have any other classmates who wanted to do what I wanted to do at all. So the first internship I got was very interesting. I did not find my job online like lots of everyone else was doing. I didn't work at a firm who came on grounds like everybody else was doing. It was all just word of mouth. Everybody knew that I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer. I feel like, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oiled, closed mouths don't get fed, pick your saying. I was that squeaky wheel. I was like, I want to go to LA or New York. I want to work in entertainment. This is my dream. Everyone I met knew this. So my very first job that I got as a law student, there was at the time his name was Bate Powell. He was like head of business affairs for Viacom MTV, and he literally called up my school and was like, "We're looking for a first year who wants to practice entertainment, who doesn't want to work at a firm and hasn't taken a job yet. Do you know anyone?" And the person he called was like, "Oh yeah, I know somebody. She tells everybody this is what she wants to do." So I ended up interviewing with him, and it worked out great, and it was hit. And that was my first job, and that job led to another job, which led to another job. And I was also competing in pageants at the time. I was a, law student that competed, and people didn't understand that either. That caused quite a bit of controversy. Like, why would you be doing this anti-feminist thing? And I'm like, I'm a woman. I love pretty things. I love my body. I love pink. I love dresses. It doesn't make me less strong, intelligent, or capable. Like, what type of feminism are y'all talking about? Uh, so that caused a little bit of.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, I think my time with pageants actually prepared me better for the world than law school did. I had to learn how to answer questions succinctly, how to walk into a room and captivate entertainment, and at the same time get my point across in 30 to 60 seconds, and how to answer questions in a way that got to the point of the question but let me control the narrative, and all of these real life skills that I use now. Even as a director, someone who's a seasoned attorney, I'm still using a lot of those skills. So I think my very unique path really suited me for entertainment law.
Hmm. That is interesting. What type of pageants did you compete in? I'm curious.
Yeah, I did a little bit of everything. I competed, well, for 2.5 years. I didn't compete long, but in that 2.5 years, I competed in the international system, which I won the title of Miss Mid-Atlantic International and competed at the international level. I competed in Virginia, USA. I was top five, I think, the first year I competed, and won Miss Congeniality a couple times. I competed in America, Miss Virginia America. They were all very different, but I feel like I learned different skills from each one.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of proves some of your early, I guess, pattern with like defying expectations and also being like more than one thing. Um, I also want to talk a little bit about how you ended up in Los Angeles. So you said you're originally from Virginia, and then your first job was MTV, which was New York City. Am I
Mhm.
correct on that?
Yes.
Yeah, so how did you end up in Los Angeles after that? Was it a job opportunity or like how did that come about?
So I was working in DC at the time at PBS, where I worked when I graduated, and I had an amazing boss who was from LA and had worked in LA. And PBS was great, but it's public broadcasting. There aren't a lot of entertainment opportunities in the DMV area. And we had a conversation, and she was like, "Look, I think that you were going to thrive in this space." She used to call me a wonderkin. Didn't know what that meant. I was like, "I feel like it's a good thing. I know now that it's a good thing." She was like, "My little wonderkin, I feel like you're going to do so well in this industry, but you're not going anyplace fast in DC. Like, we don't have the opportunities here. If this is really what you want to do, you should think about LA." So I did what most transient transplant people in this city do. I packed up my car with some suitcases and came over to Los Angeles. I was working like part-time things, didn't have a full-time job yet. I just knew I was going to get something the right time. I think like the month I ended up getting a job a few months after I moved here, a full-time job at Creative Artist Agency. I remember I had a bill. It was like a $700 credit card bill, and I put it on the wall, and I was like, I am going to get a job to be able to pay this bill. And that was my goal. Like, I had an apartment with no furniture. I think I had like a bed, and that was it. But I knew I was going to be able to pay that bill. And I remember getting my offer for CAA like the day the bill was due.
That's definitely like a full circle moment. It's like you were like purposely meant to be there.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit about 2019? I know in 2019 you made like a really big kind of like life and also career pivot. So I know earlier that year Beyonce ended up reposting a dance video you did to Before I Let Go. And you were also, you know, considering doing something more with your career beyond just being an attorney. So can you tell me a little bit about where you were in that time of your life and what were some of the things going on in the background that kind of led to that moment?
You know, it's funny because people always assume that the pivot happened because of 2020. Like, it was right around the time the world shut down, but I actually made the decision months before that. So I was already expecting to kind of like be home and just curl up and figure out my next steps. I was like, well, I'm quitting my job. I am just going to take this time to be at home and figure out what my next steps are. And then, surprise to me, we were all at home. That was a fun surprise. Actually, the day that I left my job, there was a huge like layoff situation. Then 2020 happened, but my friend called to tell me that they were doing like or he didn't tell me anything. He just said, when you get here, don't go to your office. So of course, because it's my last day, I call my mom and I'm like, they're having a surprise party for me. I had like, a fur coat on. It was super dramatic. That I get there and people are like crying and then carrying out boxes, and a lot of people got laid off. And then 2020 happened, and everybody was at home, and it was a whole mess. So I went into 2020 kind of like in a fur coat, excited for the year, because I think that year prior it had just gotten to the point, the breaking point for me. Actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, I remember looking at my student loan payments. I have a lot of law school student loans. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I went to school. I'm working a million hours a week. I got my big girl legal job. I have a cute apartment in the city. I did it correctly. Like, this is what they say to do. And I remember logging in to pay my student loans, and it said something to the effect of, at this rate, your student loans will be paid off by the time you're like 78 or something. And I was like, is this a joke? I am going to be in bondage to this crazy payment until 78. And what am I sacrificing for? Like, this is ridiculous. And just light bulbs started going off in my head. I'm like, look, if I'm going to be in debt anyway, I'm going to go out with a bang. I want it to look the way I want it to look. I want to rethink what, making money looks like. I want multiple streams of income. I want to love what I'm doing. What I'm not going to do is sacrifice until I'm 78 to maybe have a good couple of years to enjoy my life. So that for me was like a major switching point in just realizing I wanted to take control of my story, of my life, of my narrative. And then 2020 happened. So everybody was at home, which I loved because I was like, oh, we're all keeping each other company. Like, we're all figuring it out now.
I feel like the timing of your story definitely, I feel like, aligned very well. I also wanted to kind of ask a follow-up question. Did you think your time as an attorney, like, were you unfulfilled? Like, what was it about, I guess, maybe that time in your job that where you decided you needed a change, if that makes sense?
Yeah. And I think I have a lot of friends, and I'm in my mid 30s. I have a lot of friends right now who are struggling with this, particularly Black women. But we go to school, we get educated, we get our jobs, we're bosses, we're doing what we're supposed to do. But then we look at our lives and we hold it up to what we thought our lives would look like, or the lives that we, are imagining for ourselves then. That was not the life I wanted. I always knew I wanted to be a mom. I knew I wanted to be someone who didn't have to work all day, every day. I knew I wanted to be able to spend time with people who were important to me and hang out with my friends and see my family and the way my life was going. I'm like, I don't have time to do any of these things that are important to me. So I really had to have the hard question with myself of am I going to change my life? Am I going to be the person to rewrite my story to make it look the way that I want to look? Or am I going to settle into what I think I was told I'm supposed to do and who I'm supposed to be, even though it's not what I want for myself? Everyone has the right to make that decision. I have friends who are like, girl, I'm going to be rich auntie. I love my job. I take my PTO and travel and live the life. And that's the life that I want. I knew that wasn't the life that I wanted. So I really had to make a change.
Like you were saying, like the timing of everything, I feel like lined up kind of perfectly, like where you kind of made that decision and then everybody was stuck at home. And a lot of people kind of had that turning point, I feel like, in 2020. I know I definitely did. So one of the things you did in this sort of mindset shift is you created this card game, the LikeU cards. I have the travel version here. Can you tell me a little bit about like your inspiration behind making the game?
Yeah. So first, the first thing I thought of was product. I knew I wanted more streams of income. I knew I wanted to probably have a product. I wanted something that was passive income. So it started out as kind of a side hustle and then turned into more of a passion project when I, with two of my colleagues, started thinking about what do we think is lacking? What do we think the world needs? And again, happened at the perfect time. It was 2020. People were stuck at home. Kids were not going to school. People were starting jobs, having never been in the workforce and not having to network, but now they're stuck on Zooms. Everybody's socially awkward. I remember one of the part-time jobs I was working, we had like a Zoom hangout. Nobody was talking to each other. Everybody, I think someone mentioned Netflix once or twice. It's like, what are you watching? And then it was an awkward silence. And then people were like, yeah, the world's crazy. When are things going to open up again? I don't know. And then it was an awkward silence. And I was like, wow, we work together, but we are literally incapable of connecting as human beings. I think so much of the richness of being human is being seen, felt, heard, and then being able to be a student of someone else's story, making them feel the same way. That's what creates connection. But you're not going to do that if you're not having conversation, if you're not learning about somebody else, if you're not given an opportunity to get to know the other person. And I was like, people need a tool to help them through this. Like, I don't like small talk. And if I'm stuck in a room with a bunch of people who are like awkward and don't talk, I'll think of some questions. I'll create an icebreaker. I'll make a joke. But that's also a lot of work. Like, I don't want to be the person who has to do that to continue a conversation. And I was like, you know what? What if we just had a tool, which I still use our card games, our conversations card games. As you mentioned, you have the travel deck. We have a larger deck that's currently being sold in Target and Barnes & Noble. And then we also have a deck for kids and parents and a deck for teens and parents to be able to talk with their kids and, have questions other than how was your day? And we wanted a tool to be able to facilitate those conversations. I just went to lunch with my godmom and my mom, and she pulled out the cards and was like, all right, let's have a conversation. Do you believe in zodiac signs? Do you think they tell you the truth about a person? And we talked for 30 minutes about the one card. So I'm like a huge proponent of, if you don't want to be the person to carry the conversation all the time, or if you're someone that just needs a little bit of help, LikeU cards are there.
And why did you choose like a game? I'm just curious, like why do you think that was like I guess a good way to like bring your vision to life?
Why did we choose a game? I specifically wanted to create something that felt like fun. I don't like forced activities. I don't like icebreakers. I don't like going into a situation and having someone feel like they're forcing me to do anything. Games are fun. I love to play, but I don't like fake forced friendships. So we created a game. We say it's the game with no rules because we have lots of suggested ways to play. But again, I don't like being forced into anything. So I didn't want anybody else to be like, well, I don't want to learn the rules. Or, okay, we'll make up our own rules. People play it as a drinking game. I have friends that just like pull them out and one person just asks the questions and everybody answers. I have friends where they like pass the cards. We'll be like, you're only allowed to skip one time. Black people, we make up all our rules to Uno and all the things anyway. So people make up all kinds of rules for the game. But I think the game aspect makes it a little bit more fun. There's also a competition aspect. If you want there to be, one of the ways to play we have is to, if you're playing with someone you know well, you guess the answer to their question. If you're right, you put it in your right bucket. If you're wrong, you put it in your wrong bucket. And you really get to know which one of you knows the other one better. So yeah, I think games are just more fun and less stressful.
Mm-hmm. I've always said that like I feel like games are a way to kind of bring people together. I feel like they're very approachable and you don't necessarily have to be like good at a game, I guess, quote unquote, for it to still be fun. It's definitely like a good, like connection tool, I would say. Um, so I feel like just like the way that your like you cards have brought about meaningful connections, I also want to talk about the sort of conversations you have brought up with your book. So in 2022, you published your first book called Therapy Isn't Just for White People. So I feel like that title kind of says a lot, but can you tell us what was your inspiration for writing the book? And why was that an important message for you to share?
Yeah, I set out to write. Again, I mentioned as a kid, I was a writer, had a lot of imagination. I'm working on like 3 books right now. They're all like fiction, sci-fi, very different genre. I set out to write my first book, and I'm working through the characters and just doing research about how to create a character that feels real and going into the character's backstory and thinking through how their trauma affected them. So I'm creating these characters and realized that I was creating characters about different people in my life. Like, oh, these 2 characters are going to be these 2 women because they were mean to me and it affected me that way. I'm going to write them into my book. And just realized that I was writing so much of my own story. There were X's in there, I was like, there's actually a lot for me to inspect because I'm writing fictional characters and getting emotional as I'm like writing, these stories. Maybe I should start with my story. Maybe I should unpack the characters in my life. Maybe that should be the work that I do first. So did not set out to write a book about mental health. But as I mentioned, I think we are really just pieces of our experiences. We're all kind of puzzles walking around, and things that happened to us as little, hopes and desires and dreams that we had as a kid, the stuff that never happened, the things that people said to us that forever changed how we see ourselves. In the book, I talk a lot about trauma. I define trauma as something that affects the way you see God, yourself, or others. There could be micro traumas and there could be macro traumas. We think macro traumas where it's like someone died or I went through a divorce, but there are also a lot of like little micro traumas where we all have natural hair right now. I just took my braids out, so my hair is a little crazy. But, walking into a store and someone being like, oh my God, can I touch your hair? It's so crazy. Sending the message, like, I'm different than you. Constant reminder, and just how all of the things that happen to us over the course of our life impact who we are, how we show up in relationships, how we show up at work, and I think most importantly, how we show up for ourselves, the way that we talk to ourselves, whether we look in the mirror and say, girl, you can do anything, today is your day, or if you're like, I'm a victim and nobody loves me and nothing ever goes my way. The way that you talk to yourself changes everything. And a huge part of that for me was going to therapy and having somebody talk me through my life so that I could really take time to inspect what has happened to me, especially as a Black woman, especially as a Black woman working in corporate America, and kind of break down those messages so that I could rebuild up and reteach and reparent myself to be the person that I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. I feel like something else that kind of stood out to me with your book is also the way you talk about mental health, even as somebody who I feel like a lot of people might consider like an accomplished Black woman. Like you have your JD, you know, you got the corporate job, but uh, somebody like you can still struggle with things like anxiety and things like that. So was that also something else that was important to you when writing that book, is to kind of show that mental health does not just have to look one type of way, or it doesn't just affect one type of person?
I did not go into my book thinking that was going to be an issue. I was like, I'm a Black woman in America. Of course I have issues. Of course I have anxiety. Of course I have, stuff that's happened to me in corporate America that like makes me feel crazy. Of course I went to school and people were like, "Oh, you only got into that PWI cuz you're Black." And I should have got, of course I had these experiences. So for me it was very like, duh. And then I remember all of the reviews for my book that came out were great. But you know that thing, maybe on Instagram, or if you're getting feedback from like, I don't know, I'm gonna say my aunties, and everybody says something nice, and then one person says something mean or bad, and that's the only thing that you can think about. Like all the other nice stuff doesn't matter. You just like think about that one negative thing over and over. I had one person write a review that said she's not someone who should be speaking about mental health. She is accomplished. She went to a great school. She's clearly made it. Like, what does she have to complain about? And I was so triggered by the review. If you read my book and you don't like it because you didn't like my stories, that's fine. It's about my life. So you probably don't like me. I'm cool with that. But to say that I'm not allowed to struggle with mental health, I think recently after my book came out, another one of my colleagues, her name was Chesley Christ, she was Miss America. She was also an attorney. She was one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen, jumped off a building, died by suicide. So I think a lot of times for people who are highly accomplished, we end up struggling more because we're able to hide it, and people look at your success and say, "Oh, you're successful, you're the strong one. There's nothing to worry about there." And I'm not saying that's the case with her by any means, but I know for myself, it's very easy to dismiss what I'm feeling because people are like, "You always figure it out. You'll be all right. Like that one over there, she needs help. That person over there, I feel like, I could understand why they're complaining. You always figure it out. Your life is fine." Like, and I think that adds more anxiety because then you're beating yourself up over feeling the way that you're feeling because you're like, I should be grateful for my life, but I am feeling this way, but nobody's hearing me. So then you really don't feel seen and you really don't feel understood. And for people who are highly accomplished, lots of professionals have done research that says a lot of times that accomplishment is actually a coping mechanism because there's an underlying belief that you're not enough, that you're not worthy. Black women struggle with that all the time. We're constantly being told what we're not. So then sometimes it's the mentality of like, well, when I do X, Y, and Z, I will show them and they'll see how to. That's not a healthy place to be, achieving things from. So of course, a lot of us who make it, we look back and we're like, but why did I make it? And was it worth it? And what did I have to give up? And who was I trying? So there's all this stuff to unpack. So I'm really glad we're having these conversations and recognizing that the people who struggle don't always look like they're struggling.
Mm-hmm. I always say, like check on your strong friends because sometimes we have like a limited view of what struggling can look like. And I like how you said that like sometimes being a high achiever can be a coping mechanism for other things. So yeah, I literally liked that aspect of your book to kind of expand our view. I just felt like it was a very, multifaceted, like a nuanced take on the subject, which I appreciate. So I
Thank you. And I'll just mention quickly too, if someone is walking around, they might look like they have it all together. Hair might be done, edges laid, face beat. They could have cancer. You don't know. You
Mhm.
can't look at somebody, see what's happening inside. I think when we say it about a physical ailment, we're like, oh yeah, they could have sickle cell. They could have diabetes. I can't tell by looking. Mental health is no different.
Mhm. That's a good analogy too. But yeah, I feel like You've continued to share your voice in many ways over the years. We've talked about some of them here today, but you were also a radio host at one point. You were a board member for a nonprofit for women in toys. And you also started a blog about motherhood in 2013 when you became a first-time mom. So it's very evident, I feel like, throughout your career that you are, sharing your voice and bringing about these important conversations. And I feel like very much defying expectations, showing that we can be more than one thing and we can be multifaceted. And the reason I brought both of you guys here is because I felt like your stories had some parallels about, defying expectations. So I want to dig into Knimbley's story a little bit more. So I asked Kiara this earlier, but I'm really interested in like your origin story. Like, what were you like as a kid? What were you like growing up? What were your kind of hobbies and interests? And how do you think those influenced you today?
Okay, thank you for having me on. I yap, so I will try to be as concise as possible in answering your questions. What was I like as a kid was the first one.
Yeah,
Uh, have you ever seen the cartoon Dexter's Laboratory?
I
It
haven't.
it's a little redheaded kid. He has a laboratory. He's a big nerd, and he's kind of reclusive. He gets a little agitated when people disturb his space. I was very much like that. Not antisocial, but very much in my own world. I grew up with one of my younger siblings, and she and I are still best friends to this day. Um, and going to the library, and I enjoyed talking to other people and learning about them, but I didn't really know how to socialize. And then I came to find out later why that was, but I'll just start with how I was as a kid. So, really inquisitive, really um, just like information hungry. I loved video games, but I didn't really know how to connect that to like connecting with other people my age. But I got bullied pretty much my entire youth just because I didn't know how to socialize with people. Um, and it was weird because I enjoyed hanging out with folks, but we didn't have similar interests. So it was just kind of this disconnect where I was like, dang, I don't know anything about this, you know, group or magazine that my classmates are talking about, but I know a lot about Pokemon, but they don't like Pokemon, so what do I talk to them about? So there was a lot of that, and I still had a really nice childhood in some respects, but it was hard to connect with other kids. So I just really poured myself into working on art and writing. So hearing that you worked on a book was really cool. I was really into science too. I remember one of my parents got me this, it was like a monthly science experiment kit from the Magic School Bus. I don't know if y'all remember that show, but they had it through
Yep.
Scholastic where every month they would send you just little like simple science experiments, and one was making asteroids or meteors out of muffins. You weren't supposed to eat them. It was just like baking soda, almost like a bath bomb. Um, and like making slime at home and really kind of tactile activities. So yeah, that was like the gist of how I was as a kid. I think I feel really lucky growing up around the kids that I did, despite not totally fitting in because I grew up in a mostly black and brown neighborhood. I think if I hadn't, that would have made it a lot harder for me. Yeah, I feel like I'm not answering your question totally. I feel like I'm just giving like the lore.
No, I feel I feel like this is good. It kind of gives you an idea that you were like a creative kid, but also you were interested in science,
Yeah,
more like kind of to yourself.
yes.
I feel like this is kind of a good like segue into your career because
Mhm,
you are a scientist, correct? Or
mhm,
that was your career before.
mhm.
Can you kind of explain like how you got into that? Like I was reading something and it says you had experience in computer science, biotech research, and development in scientific communications fields. I have no idea what
Yeah.
that means, so I'm curious how you got into that. All right, y'all, I gotta pause the conversation here. If you are enjoying Kwanzaa Unwrapped so far, make sure that you are subscribed. Hello? Y'all know the drill. Leave a comment below. Let me know what is resonating with you. I love reading comments, so let's engage down there. And if you're feeling generous this holiday season, consider a super thanks or becoming a channel member. I actually uploaded the full uncut panel discussion with no ads for my Monarch member tier because we ended up talking way longer than I anticipated, so check that out if that interests you. A few dollars really does go a long way to help me create more of the content that you find most impactful. I'll leave more information in the description below. Now, back to the show.
Cool. Well, you know what's so funny? So, Kiara mentioned earlier that one of the cards in her like you card game, which I think is really cool. That's actually how I like to bond with people. So I'm gonna have to go and get a deck on my own. I'm like, oh heck yeah, I'll just pull this out one day when I get nervous. But yeah, I do like astrology. I won't talk about it too much, but I'm a Gemini. I have like a lot of random interests like all over the place. And I went into the science field in kind of a weird backwards way. And I had always been interested in it, but this is a little bit of a sad segue, but right before I graduated high school, one of my parents passed away. So I had to work just to help take care of my family. So I didn't go straight to university. And in that time, it was kind of a good break, just because that's a very traumatic thing to go through in general, but especially at that transitional point in life. So I spent a great deal of time just kind of figuring out what direction I wanted to go. And because originally I wanted to go to university for animation so that I could make almost like a magic school bus type of show so that I could, teach science and just like general literacy, but in an approachable format. Because where I grew up, just a literacy in general, regardless of age, was just very low. And I knew that a big part of that was just because of institutional racism and intergenerational trauma, and some people don't have the capacity to go to school. So I was like, okay, people like cartoons and TV shows, like that might be something. But that ended up going in a different direction because I was like, I don't want to pay for art school and then not have a job. So then I figured like, oh, I'll get into computer science because I'm on my computer all day playing video games and I really like programming math. So I stuck with that for quite a while. And I had been basically just burnout because, like I said, I was helping to take care of like the rest of my family and trying to go to school. And I just essentially just burned out completely and just decided to work for about 6 years. So within that time, I was still studying and I was still connecting with other folks and I was still working on like data science projects and things like that. And it was kind of like a grassroots exploration. I'm really lucky that I'm from the Bay Area originally. So there's a lot more opportunity for folks if they don't have their undergrad or certification completed to still work on like keystone projects and stuff like that. And yeah, I basically just did kind of like odd jobs and projects at nonprofits, and at startups, transitioning from data science and computer science into regular science with like biotech, literally came from getting my nails done. So basically, my nail tech's husband had worked at this bioengineering, biotech startup, and I had been talking to her for months and months. I was like, oh, I really wish I could just leave my nonprofit job, even though I really love what we're doing and I love being able to program things. I just want to work in a lab. Like, I need to do that. And again, like so much of what Kiara was saying about that accomplishment like wound almost hit me, but I think that there was a part of me that felt like I wasn't valid as a person if I didn't have like a career that was seen as like prestigious, like in science. Even though I love it, was more passionate about teaching science than I was doing the actual research. I was like, okay, if I at least get my hands into a lab, working professionally, and being around other people that have had this experience internationally. Because that particular startup, the CEO worked with Lawrence Hall in Berkeley. So I was working with some really brilliant people from all over the world, and I was so grateful. I got to lead some of my own projects in the time that I was there. We were helping people get cancer treatment across the world more efficiently. That was awesome. But then I got burnout from that because it's a startup and you got to work something like 70 hours a week. Um, and then I transitioned into doing content creation full time.
That's a perfect segue because my next question is about your content creation journey and how you
Okay.
got into it. So, yeah, just talk about how you originally got introduced to content creation and why Twitch as a platform specifically.
I think it might be easier if I start with Twitch as a platform. I got onto Twitch because as I started my therapy journey back in 2016, I spent a lot more time at home because I needed to just like ground. Working through trauma was really heavy, and I just needed to just be in my own company again so that I could sort through everything. So I really got into board games with my partner and friends at the time and video games. And Twitch at that time was primarily video games. And there was one game that I played that was pretty competitive and I wanted to improve. And some friends of mine told me that, oh, if you watch Twitch streamers, they'll teach you like different strategies and how to improve and they'll help review your, you know, think of it like trying to find a sports coach, but on Twitch. That's why I went there. And I ended up really enjoying having the company of live streams while I was working at the nonprofit because I was the only person that worked in office at the time. So it was pretty lonely. So I would have the Twitch stream up watching a person playing a game and interacting with them in chat while I was, sorting through people talking about their trauma essentially because I was going through, so it was like a nice balance, some levity dealing with family trauma at the same time. And eventually once the COVID lockdown happened about 3 years later, I was super lonely, which was a weird experience for me as someone who really enjoys my own company. It was weird to feel like I had too much of it. So I missed, those interactions with like the barista or my bus driver, because I really like having routine. And when that was gone, I was like, oh my God, what do I do? I'm working from home right now, and they don't know that I'm in Zoom in my pajamas in bed because I don't have to be on a camera. So now, like, I don't know. So I started to stream my own gameplay because I was already familiar with the Twitch platform, and it kind of took off relatively quickly. And yeah, I made some great friends through that. So it also helped me to build more confidence in connecting with people. The way that I'm talking with you all now, did not think I would ever be able to do that with folks. Yeah, this has been a very bizarre, in a good way, year with everything that I've done.
So I kind of wanted to touch on something you said earlier because you said you are more of a soft-spoken person.
Mhm.
And I believe when you first started streaming, you didn't have your face, like you were a
Yeah,
faceless streamer.
yeah,
Or is that the word? You know what I mean.
yeah. Yeah. I
But
think they
yeah,
say
how
no face cam or something like that, but I get what you mean. Yeah.
yeah. So what kind of, I guess, inspired you as someone who is like that kind of to start streaming? Because at least for me, I feel like with creating video content versus being live, like those experiences are very different.
Mhm.
Like I would feel like going live like would feel much more anxiety inducing than other types of
Interesting.
content. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in like why like what is your relationship with that and like why streaming?
That's so funny that, and not funny as in, I think it's strange that you feel that way, but I feel the opposite about recording. But I do think that it's because I had a lot more experience having spontaneous conversations with people. Because while I was starting university, I also worked as a barista. So a lot of the communication style that you have when you work in food service or when you go to events, at conventions. So when I was in the computer science field, I would go to conventions all the time just to meet people. And you only have, a few seconds to interact with folks. So I was like, oh, this is just like helping people when I'm at work. So I think that made live streaming seem more approachable because it was essentially small talk, but in my most comfortable setting, which is in the comfort of my own home. Live streaming really gave me that space because when I find myself recording content, I'm more critical of the way that I speak because I have the power to edit it. And as a person with OCD, it's better that I don't have that control. You know, I just be free. um, like I don't want to have to like make that choice. But I commend you, Asmara, for editing and recording your content because I've been doing that lately. And oh my God, you gotta be a magician almost to get through everything. And it felt more natural for me to do streaming because it's more conversational.
Hmm. That's definitely really interesting. I think it kind of shows to, different people's comfortability and also like different skill sets. Like I
Hmm.
think that's also something people don't expect is that um streaming and versus like video creation or even like doing short form,
Hmm.
like all these different types of content creation require different skill sets. But yeah, I also want to talk a little bit about how you implement your various passions into your stream community. So we talked a little bit about your, background with science. I also know that you love art and fashion. How do you like implement these different, I guess, attributes and interests into your community?
Well, I'm laughing because I'm like, how silly should I be right now? So you know when people gatekeep their interests and they're like, no, I'm not going to talk to anyone about it. I'm the opposite of that. I'm like, kick the knob off of the fire hydrant and just you will like this stuff. I'm going to talk to you about this, and you can do the same to me. Like, let's share. I think that that comes from having been bullied when I was younger and feeling like I didn't have that space to be my full self. I try to invite that environment by just sharing the things that I like and being genuinely curious about other folks, even if it's like F1. I just got into it because a friend of mine is really into it, and I'm like, okay, cars going fast, but she's so passionate about the engineering, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna learn about this too. And it goes back to the literacy thing that I mentioned earlier, where I feel if I'm able to connect art and fashion and science to just regular day to day things that people enjoy, it'll make them more curious and open and hopefully think more critically about things. I think that if I can normalize just curiosity in every part of people's life, then it'll make them less resistant to facts. For example, if I were going to talk about this necklace that I'm wearing, it's a vintage Vivienne Westwood necklace, and I would explain to my community like how Vivienne Westwood as a fashion house started and like where she got a lot of her early inspiration from, and then connecting it like whatever era that was from to a game that we were playing, and then connecting that information to real world history. And eventually, it always leads back to radicalizing my community to learn more about where they're from. Like, that's the pipeline is like, oh, this thing that you're interested in. Okay, here's the real world implications of that. Like, go to the library and check this out. It's really cool. And the beauty of that is that it applies to any subject. So I've been able to teach my community like physics and math and creative writing just through talking to them about my interests and theirs.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of goes full circle to what you said you originally wanted to do when you were first interested in science,
Hmm.
so or pursuing a career in science. So it's cool that that's kind of come full circle.
Hmm.
And I feel like another thing you also implement in your streams is very much like a low sensory, like calming environment. I know
Hmm.
you do a lot of like ASMR and video game lore keeping.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about like what that looks like, and also why is catering to a more I can't think about the word, but like low sensory type of environment important for you in gaming especially?
That's a great question. I actually did a whole panel about that earlier this year. I know just from my background in trauma sensitive care and my lived experience as someone with anxiety and trauma that the world can be extremely overstimulating, especially because we have access to information nonstop. And because there's so many people that have trauma and are going through things mentally but don't have access to therapy, it can be hard to have coping mechanisms that also aren't preventing them from living their lives fully and shaming themselves simultaneously. So, in a way, I remind people in my community I'm not a therapist, I'm not a trained professional in that regard. Like, I'm certified in trauma sensitive care, but I am not a therapist, I'm not a social worker. I'm just somebody who wants to try to take the edge off of your day and validate how you're feeling just by showing up authentically by having that streaming space where I'm able to just speak naturally. Like, this is my natural speaking voice, and let people know that that's normal for some folks. It's made me feel so much more confident, and I feel sometimes conflicted talking about that experience, like as a Black woman, because I have a lot of privilege. Like, I'm Black and Filipino. Like, I'm very like light skinned, so I try not to take up space within like the Black gaming community, especially because I know that other folks have a lot more challenges than I do. And it's that fine line of how do I show up authentically as myself, but also not force myself into this mold of what people think an acceptable Black woman is.
Mhm.
Showing up in my soft voice and trying to be comforting to folks is so affirming to me as a Black woman, because throughout a lot of my life, I was told by other people that I wasn't being genuine, that I was trying to be white, or that I was ashamed of my identity. And I felt a lot of angst, about different parts of my identity, but I haven't felt ashamed of it. I wanted to embrace it more, but it's like it's not acceptable by most of society.
I think, at least speaking for like the gaming space, I think sometimes there's like an assumption that like Black women who make content have to look a certain type of way or talk a certain type of way,
Mhm,
or there's only one type of personality that is
mhm,
acceptable. And I know, Kiara, you can probably relate to that even in the corporate world of like what is a palatable or an acceptable way to be Black.
mhm.
And feel free to chime in if you have an example or something to share. But yeah, I really appreciate Knimbley how you like showing up as yourself authentically, being more soft spoken, but still kind of having a voice. I feel like in and of itself is like significant.
Knimbley, it's so interesting hearing you talk. I kept like drifting because I told you I'm writing a bunch of books. One of them is a fantasy book. I can't tell you too much about it, but it's like
So exciting.
two twin sisters who have powers. But you remind me so much of one of my characters. And while her sister is like very outgoing, extroverted, and like physically gets her power from like things and people around her, she's very like introverted, but just as powerful. But her power comes more from internally, like her soft voice, whereas her sister has to be very loud with her powers. Her power is a whisper. And I was just listening to you talk because
Oh,
I
I
think
love that.
the idea that power, we have such a specific way of what it looks like. It's loud, it's masculine, it's overbearing, it takes up a lot of space, when a lot of times I think power is can be soft spoken. It's knowing yourself, it's knowing who you are, it's
Mhm.
knowing where you come from, it's being grounded in who you are, and that doesn't have to be loud.
And if it
And I
is loud,
also,
that's okay. But yeah, look, you were saying that's smart. Sorry to cut you off. Just like briefly, what you mentioned about gaming. I think that that's something that frustrates me so much about this space is that, and why I'm really quick to shut people down when they try to use me as an example of a palatable Black person within the gaming space. They're like, oh, like you're so well spoken, which like tilts me so much. And I just try to think of channel my grandmother, who's just like, just be graceful when people say ridiculous things, because there's other like Black folks in my shared spaces who have apologized for using AAVE. Just like, sorry, I'm not speaking proper. I'm like, yeah, you are. I understand what you're saying. You don't need to talk like me. Like, it's okay. So 100% what you said is that we can show up in a bunch of different ways, and it's society that's making, I think, Black people feel like we need to be one way.
yeah, and the other thing I just wanted to say is that even with our different like intersections and identities, you still deserve to be in the gaming space, and I feel like you still have a place to talk about your experience as a Black woman. Even though I understand like what you were saying before of like not necessarily wanting to um overstep, I guess, in a way, like maybe like darker skinned black women, or black women who have different experiences.
Mhm.
Like your experience is also valid too, and so I'm glad that you're here and able to kind of talk about this.
Thank you.
The theme of this episode is purpose, as we know. So both of you have had really, I feel like, multifaceted, I guess, careers and experiences that have shaped you to who you are today. um but I want to know, has there been like a moment, or maybe even a series of like little moments that you feel like has made kind of like your purpose abundantly clear? Like, this is the reason I do what I do. So I'll start with Kiara on this one.
I wouldn't say I've had one moment, but I think when I look back, all just a collection of lots of little moments that have just made my path very clear. I think becoming a mom too, just makes you think about the world that you're leaving behind for the person that you created and what you want it to look like and how you want to contribute that. So I think the things that were important to me, it's just like they became exponentially even more important to me, becoming a mom. But I think a lot of it comes back to the theme of like power. And we tend to think of power as dominance, like how can I dominate over somebody else? And just really rethinking that. Like, I know I talked a lot about rewriting my story and changing the narrative and picking up the pen and deciding things were going to look different. But I think all of us have an internal power over our lives and how we want to live our lives and the types of people that we want to be. And just on a very individual level, what does it mean to like reclaim your power? Where does your power come from? Where do you recharge? What's important to you? Who's important to you? And making sure you set up your life in a way that all of those things are the priority. I think the experiences that I've had have just really helped me see that very clearly. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work with kids, and it's, kind of what Knimbley, you're talking about dealing with the trauma of things that happen to you as you grow up. We can't fully ever take away people's experiences with trauma. And I think there's always going to be conflict. We're humans. But to the extent that we can minimize it, because we're giving kids the tools that they need to find their power and their voice and set their boundaries and be clear on their identity and what makes them worthy, not what they do, but who they are, not what they look like, but how they show up in the world. To the extent that we can help kids figure that out, I think that we're doing the world the best service that, well, I'll speak for myself. I feel like that's the best service that I can do the world.
How does how would you answer this question, Nimbley?
I feel like I like to echo what Kiara said, and just towards a slightly older audience, because most of the people in my space are college age and all the way up to, there's some people I was very surprised that are seniors that watch my content. I'm not sure why. There's plenty of other shows and stuff, but hey, I'll take it. But because, like Kiara said, you can't take away people's trauma. I feel that there's a lot of folks within that age group that feel it's too late for them to heal or build community, or this is the thing that I'm so passionate about, is people healing that childhood wound of not feeling like they're creative, because I feel that creativity and education kind of go hand in hand. It's just the way that we approach education, at least in the States, stamps out creativity at a very young age. And I feel allowing people to understand that there's not a game over, and they're healing, and that it's a lifelong process, that they, like you said, it's so cool to hear this echoing. I'm like, oh, I'm in the right space. Like, these folks think the same way. Like, this is so awesome. Yeah, I think each moment that someone's told me, hey, Nimbley, you were talking about that experience you had at the lab where you had to stand up for yourself, and how you felt like you were gonna, cry and have like break down, but you stood firm in yourself. And I was thinking about that when I had to talk to my manager the other day. And I'm live playing video games, being silly, and people are putting this into the chat, which I'm grateful that they do, because a lot of people don't have that space to do so. But I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of you for doing that, and being very validating and affirming, especially when I go to conventions in person. And I had a viewer approach me. They came up to me and they were very nervous, but they told me that hearing how I spoke about my experiences and the type of space that I created helped them want to seek out getting therapy for the first time because all their life they had been told that there was nothing wrong with them and basically gaslit about their mental health. And just hearing me talk about those experiences made them feel affirmed and getting care. And I'm sitting there just like same thing with the chat, just like, oh, I'm really grateful and validating, but on the inside I'm sobbing. I'm like, dang, all that tough experiences I went through, all the healing and how painful that was, it was so I could show up for people and have almost like that echo of, or butterfly effect. That's why I have the butterflies. Yes, butterfly effect of me
I
doing
love
my
Me
healing.
butterflies.
I
too.
do too. Mine started with Mariah
I don't know if you can
Carey.
see them in the
Yeah.
background, but yeah, I have several
Yes, oh, the
butterflies
pretty.
around.
Yes, I love that. But oh, and fun. So here's how the stream would go. We would talk about butterflies and how cool they are, and then I would do something silly and say, when butterflies metamorphosize, people think that they just go from caterpillar and then boom, they sprout wings. No, they turn into like basically a smoothie. And then no, seriously, they liquefy in their cocoon and then they become a beautiful butterfly. So I tell people that's kind of like what therapy is like. I hate to say it. You kind of liquefy the person that you were before and then you slowly become a
It's
butterfly.
so
So
funny to say
when that
that
when that
because I
person
also, right, we're all maybe obsessed with butterflies. I don't know. But I went through a
yes.
very big butterfly obsession, and I was reading about how the most painful part of the experience is like when they're breaking out of the cocoon, and like
Really? I
how
didn't know
all
that.
of it, I guess, is the rest of it doesn't hurt as much, but like the most pain they feel because they have to like beat their wings at like a crazy mile per hour in order to like break the cocoon to get out, and it's exhausting, and some don't even make it. Like it's like this is
Oh,
your final battle, final test. And also just thinking through how so often when we're like about to make it to that next level, you get to that space where you're like, I can't do it
yeah.
anymore. There's like that last thing you have to push
Yeah.
through, and just thinking about like how beautiful it is to get to the other side. So, the butterfly story is it's a good one.
I love that. I didn't know that. That makes me respect butterflies so much. It's just like they're beautiful, but they almost didn't exist if they didn't pull through that way. So
I feel like this is a great like analogy metaphor.
yeah.
So, okay, so I feel like as we wrap up this conversation, I also kind of want to talk a little bit about how purpose can also pivot or I guess like evolve
Mhm.
and what that can look like over time. Like maybe something that uh, you feel called to do at one point may not be what you are called to do at a different point. And so, Kiara, I want to start with you on this question. So, the last day of Kwanzaa is actually Imani, which means faith. And I feel like that's not a coincidence that I found you and your story while planning this. And so I want to ask you, as you sort of made this, I guess, big life change, or I guess series of moments of life changes to get you to where you are today, um, if you were to choose like maybe a younger version of yourself, knowing what you know now, what would you tell the younger version of yourself? If that makes sense. If you had like advice to give.
It's funny because the last chapter of my book is literally just a letter to my younger me, like all of the things that I would tell myself. Like that's the whole last chapter. And I say a lot of things, but I mean, really, I would tell myself to invest in Apple, but that's not the story. What I if I think about like the theme, I think it's instead of trying to be less of who you are to fit in and to become this power person you think you're supposed to be more of who you are. Like the spaces where you're trying to shrink should actually be the spaces that you're amplifying because that's what makes you different. I think so much of ourselves when we're little, we're just trying to fit in and be like everybody else. And then you get to a space and you're like, wait, but what makes me different is what makes me special. So what are those things and how can I lean into that more?
What about you, Knimbley? If you were, it's no doubt that like with your streaming journey you had to take, a leap of faith. I was reading a tweet of yours from right around the time of like TwitchCon was happening, and you said something that I really resonated with, which is, I started streaming at one of the loneliest and lowest points of my life. Never would I imagine feeling so much love from people I met on my computer. So I feel like this is just kind of one glimpse into, I feel like, a larger, I guess, story or pattern that a lot of people can resonate with. Like, kind of like we're talking about the butterfly analogy, like just getting through that last step to truly metamorphize or whatever the word is, you know?
One of those words.
Yeah. So, yeah, like if you were to tell like a younger version of yourself, maybe that version when you were just starting to stream, or another version of yourself, what would you tell her?
Oh gosh. I would probably say to myself, you're doing the right thing. You know, having that faith is what a lot of us need to not just be successful, but to feel alive in a sense. I was working in a space of anxiety and fear that things would go wrong. And I think that I could have just used that moral support of, you're doing the right thing. You're making the right choice. Don't question that. Just do it. And if you need to pivot later, you've been through a lot worse things in life and they sucked, but you're here. So now this is a part of your life where you get to live it. What is for you is going to feel good and natural. It's not going to be easy, but the stuff that's not for you, that's the stuff that you're going to really struggle through. And y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like, not struggle as in the stuff that we normally deal with, but there's definitely things that past me was just clinging on to dear life, and I should have just cut the
Like there's some
cord.
resistance there.
Yeah, if stuff
Mhm.
doesn't connect, just let it go. It's okay. Something else will come through.
And I want to end this conversation actually with one of the Like You cards that I thought was really fitting.
Oh,
So we'll get to play, I guess, like a short round.
I can't.
But the question I'm choosing is the blue one. What motto do you live by?
So funny because we talked about like different versions of ourselves. So depending on the season I'm in, I feel like different mottos make sense, different songs resonate, different quotes or different people I follow. So it's just like really changing. I think in this particular season that I'm in, it's really been kind of like a season of surrender, like believing that I have and
Hmm.
am doing everything in my power for things to go the way that they're meant to, and trusting that like the rest will fall into place. Like the people who are supposed to be here will, the people who are not supposed to be here won't. Like there's the piece you can control and the piece that you can't. So I've really been like in this season, like in the serenity prayer, which I know a lot of people know from like Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's like, God, give me the wisdom or the strength to change what I can change. It's
Hmm.
knowing what you can change, surrendering to what you can't change, and then the wisdom to know the difference. Like, what do I have power to
Hmm.
change, and where are the areas in life that I'm like surrendering? So I'm just like constantly thinking about that as I like move through my decisions. Like, is this something I have power to change? Is this something that is completely out of my hands, like the current president? And where give me the like
Whew,
know the
yeah.
difference and to sit in both.
Yeah, that's powerful. What about you, Nimbley? Is there like a motto or, you know, a word, a quote, something like that that you live by?
I feel like I have a few different ones, but mostly because I'm silly and unserious when I'm going through difficult times. So I don't know if y'all familiar with like Brat Summer from Charlie XCX. So instead of Brat Summer, I have Anguish Autumn and Whimsy Winter and Silly Spring because I get seasonal affective disorder in the summer, so that's the worst time of the year for me. But I love the winter. I do feel like a sense of almost stasis and hibernation right now uh, in the winter time where, yeah, things that aren't feeling natural, I'm just letting it go. Just let it go, do its own thing. And the things that do feel natural, I'm pouring myself into, as opposed to, trying to almost have this tug of war with that. So, whimsy winter, silly spring, brat summer, anguish autumn. There we go.
That sounds like an album, you know?
Yeah,
That's
Charlie
coming
from
Right.
2025.
yeah, exactly.
Kind of like as we were talking, I kind of felt like led to share this. So I feel like my answer to this question, like what motto do I live by? So I have a tattoo right here. I mean, you can't see it because but
I'm imagining.
it's a butterfly and the words underneath it says the world is waiting on you. And I feel like over these past few years, I've kind of implemented, you see butterflies around my office, and I got my butterfly tattoo. But the reason I got that tattoo is actually a quote from a book by Elaine Welteroth. She used to be the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue.
I just gotta say this. I met her, and I met her like when I first moved to LA, and I was excited to meet her. And it was one of those events where like Oprah was there, and like all of these other people in the street, and everyone's like trying to like rejuvenate. Everyone's trying to meet these other people, and I was like beelining for Elaine because I just feel like we have a lot in common. And she was really busy at the moment, and she was like, I like is super busy, but like we're gonna talk, we're gonna take a picture, I'll find you. Like, okay, I work in entertainment, I know how these things go. I was just glad second to like listen to me tell her how much I loved her. 2 hours later, I'm talking to someone else. She finds me and she's like, oh, so sorry. Like, I don't mean to interrupt, but I told you I would find you. So like, let's take a picture. How are you doing? And like checked in. And I was like, really special. But yeah, read your quote. I love it.
Yes. That's so beautiful. Listen, I chose the right people for this panel. Like, I'll definitely come full circle. But yeah, so the reason I got that tattoo, The World is Waiting on You, is because the last book or the last paragraph of her quote really stood out to me. So it says this: when you find yourself existing in the space between dreams realized, parts of you will feel too big for where you are, while other parts of you will feel too small for where you're going. Go anyway. Do not wait. Do not wonder if you can. Do not ask for permission. When you get lost, it's okay to stop, to look up, to look within for the answers. They're always there. And when the world tells you to shrink, expand. Remember, you have done enough. You are enough. You were born enough. The world is waiting on you. So I felt like that just resonated with so many things we've talked about today. And yeah, like that those words just really spoke to me. And I felt like that's kind of like the epitome of like, walking in purpose and truly living authentically to you and what you're called to do.
The way we all had butterfly kinship is tripping me out. Just like, we're all fluttering together. I love that.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I definitely did. So many gems were dropped. I will leave links to both of these guests in the description so you can follow them and support their work. And if this kind of content resonates with you, please hit that share button and send the video link to your group chat or to someone you think would really benefit from the discussion we had here today. This is a free way that you can support me and the show. But listen, child, Kwanzaa is not over yet. I am dropping fresh episodes every day this week, so make sure that you're back here tomorrow for more. My name is Asmara, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.